Hello everyone and welcome to Wildlight. I'm Gray Wilder and I'm so excited to start this new podcast. Today is the first episode of this podcast and I'm just feeling really happy today because if you followed me for a long time, you may know that I already had a podcast called Dream Green. I made it in quarantine while I was still in high school, and I talked about sustainability lifestyle tips, I talked about climate news, and I also talked about wildlife news and wildlife conservation updates globally. And I really had a fun time making that podcast, but it was a lot of work, and I took a 3-year hiatus from that, 2 or 3 years. And now that I'm in university and currently studying as a wildlife researcher abroad in Nepal, I have a lot more to share, and I've been really thinking about ways to kind of have a voice or an outlet to share everything that I've been learning, feeling, and interested in within wildlife conservation. And I thought starting up this podcast would be a good idea, and I'm finally starting it on YouTube because before it was only audio podcast. So I hope you enjoy this episode on queer ecology. It's a topic that I've been wanting to talk about since Dream Green in high school. And I thought, what better way to start off this new podcast than to pick up where I left off and talk about something that I think deserves a lot more attention within the wildlife conservation space. So I'm really excited to get started today. And without further ado, I wanted to introduce our topic today, which is queer ecology. So queer ecology is an emerging field that brings together queer theory, ecological thought, and critical science studies. It questions heteronormative assumptions in science and environmentalism and offers alternatives rooted in fluidity, multiplicity, and interdependence. So there's a lot of big words in there, and basically, queer ecology applies ecological thought into, or queer theory into ecological thought, because there has been a very deep-seated, rooted history of overlooking or straight up denying queer behaviors within biology and animal science that I think it's really important to highlight. So today, not only are we going to be discussing queer ecology in terms of history and definition, but also examples that we've seen within animal life. Important note is that queerness exists in not only animal life, but also plant life and fungi. But this is a wildlife podcast, so we're mainly going to talk about examples within animal life in this podcast, but it's important to note that queerness exists in nature in all different forms. And although we're going to be focusing on animals this time around, it's important to know that it's not solely just in animals as well. So we're going to be talking about examples within wildlife, and we're also going to be talking about the ideas of queer ecology within genetics, because there are a lot of points that have been made that are, the arguments against queerness being natural that include genetics and a kind of poor understanding of why queerness has stayed around within the gene pool and throughout evolution. So I kind of wanted to touch on that, and I am in no means an expert in queer ecology. I hope this podcast episode can just kind of give everyone a basis of what this field really entails in just kind of a conversational way. And I really hope that the information that I provide in this episode is just kind of gonna inspire more people to look on their own time and do more research within their own communities and talk about it more within their educational spaces or just among friends too. So this is just going to be a very broad take on what queer ecology is and the examples that we see within nature, and I hope you enjoy it. So to get into what we're going to talk about today more specifically, animals of various species provide examples of how gender, sex, and sexuality are far more complex than the rigid categorization that we often put them into. And queerness is very abundant throughout nature. And rhetoric, or people who are trying to delegitimize the existence of queer, trans, and intersex people by deeming them as like unnatural or abhorrent is just flat out wrong, and not based in any scientific merit, pure just ignorance and discrimination. So I really want to focus on that today, and keep highlighting that queerness is natural. It is completely normal within the natural world, and I find it almost ridiculous from a naturalist point of view that people may use nature and genetics as a means to delegitimize people in our world, and dehumanize them. It's ridiculous. And we're going to get into that more as we go through this episode. And I wanted to highlight this one fun fact that I keep seeing throughout my research when I'm looking into queer ecology, is that same-sex behavior has been recorded in over 1,500 species across the animal kingdom. And what I find extremely fascinating about this is that, yes, that's a big number, but also it hasn't been that long since we have started incorporating queer ecology into an accepted, a recognized, and accredited field within wildlife science and ecology. And I think the longer we're studying this, the more resources that we give people who are really recognizing these behaviors and conservation strategies. Furthermore, with queer behaviors and queer identities, we're gonna discover so much more than 1,500. I believe like this is a quite underestimated number, I believe, because this is what is proven so far in the literature, and there is so much more work that we can do to prove that it is all the more abundant. And I want to emphasize again is that we are just as much a part of nature as the forest of redwoods or a pride of lions, and it is important to acknowledge this because once we do define queerness as natural and prevalent within nature, it's important not to separate ourselves from that. We are part of nature. We are nature. So yeah, again, I'm going to be focusing on a lot of these like common like strategies of rhetoric for people who are, delegitimizing queerness, and a lot of that is going to be covered in this episode and kind of combated throughout the whole time that I'm speaking. So if you hear me talking and circling back to this a lot, just know it's part of why I think this is so important to talk about. So I again wanted to talk about examples within wildlife, but before I do that, actually, I do want to go over why this is important within wildlife conservation, because as a person who has taught a conservation course at UC Berkeley for undergraduates, that a common theme within our course was talking about how conservation really works and challenges within conservation that might not be like as idealized or perfect as we like to think of them ethically. And what I mean by that is that conservation comes with a lot of conversations with people who may not have the same inherent value of nature as someone who is, dedicated their lives to this. It's a lot of discussion with different types of people, and there's a lot of back and forth with that, and it's important to be respectful and but also come with the facts. So without further ado, I wanted to kind of talk about why I think that's important to recognize within conservation management. And this field of queer ecology is discovering new things about animal behavior and animal social interactions and identities that have been historically overlooked or disregarded. And this is important to know and learn about because conservation management needs all the education and science and information that we can get, because to provide the most efficient, productive, and resource efficient methods of protecting animals and advocating for wildlife, you need this information. You need to know as much about their social interactions and their preferences and their identities as much as possible, because you never know how this information may lead to a better conservation strategy or a better policy work and better management. So again, these ideas within queer ecology have so many applications. And as we go through examples of animals exhibiting these behaviors, I want you to think about how these behaviors that have been proven to be shown within these animals might be incorporated into conservation management and policy as well. And I think, for me, that is very, very interesting. And I hope that people listening to this episode also agree that that is super, super interesting to think about. And without more delay, I've been talking your ear off probably about all the basics of queer ecology and why it's important and everything, but I want to go into which animals exhibit queer behavior. And for me, as someone who has been studying wildlife science for as long as I can remember, and also been in different fields within conservation for at least around 5 or 6 years by now, one of the most prevalent examples of queer ecology that I can think of is bonobos. So if you're not familiar, bonobos are famously bisexual. And we know this because they've been shown to engage in sexual activity with same-sex pairings as well as different sex pairings for a long time now. We know them as not exclusively, not monogamous, let's say, but female bonobos engaging in same-sex behavior today, for one day, might seek out a male partner the next day and vice versa. Regardless of who they're partnered up with at that time, bonobos serve as a great reminder that bisexuality is not a phase. It is a genuine sexuality, and is exhibited within bonobos in nature, which I think is a really good example of that, because there is undeniable proof that this does exist within their societies. And I think it's important to recognize that. And as well as bonobos, I think one of the more popular examples of queer ecology within the wildlife world is penguins. So one of the most famous stories of penguins exhibiting same-sex behaviors or same-sex couplings is Roy and Silo. So if you haven't heard of them before, they are a pair of male chinstrap penguins housed at the Central Park Zoo, and they brought the topic of gay animals to the mainstream. And zookeepers originally noticed Roy and Silo practicing mating rituals with each other and treating a rock like an egg to be hatched. And so what I think was really cute about this interaction is that the zookeepers ultimately decided to give them an actual egg to see what they would do. And the pair captured hearts of millions of people on social media by raising their chick named Tango together. It's so cute. And this was originally, their story was made into a children's book, and it's a pretty famous book. It's called And Tango Makes Three. And it's a really cute children's book in my opinion. As a children's book author myself, I have a real appreciation for educational wildlife and climate science kids books, and this book is so cute because it talks about this story in a way that kind of normalizes different family structures, you know, not just the heteronormative family structure of a mom, dad, and a child, but also maybe a dad and two daddies and a child, or two mommies and a child, and recognizing that that's normal. And I think in the classroom setting that's really helpful too, because kids might have different experiences in their family or family dynamics that are less widely known or widely talked about within our society right now. So I think it's really important to kind of introduce that in a fun way. And I think the story of Roy and Silo is really, really cute, and what an amazing way to, you know, introduce that to young kids. And as a children's book author, again, it's like, it warms my heart, and I feel like a special appreciation for that now. And once more, when Tango grew up, I can't believe, like, this is just such a cute story, okay? Because when Tango grew up, she ultimately was seen with another female penguin engaging in similar behaviors as her dad's before her. And so Tango is a lesbian icon, and I couldn't be more happy, because this is like it's such a heartwarming story. I love to see it, and I think it's time for a queer remake of Happy Feet. We need like a petition. If there's not a petition already, remake Happy Feet. But yeah, again, as a children's author, I also made a story about penguins, but in the context of climate science, and kind of introducing climate science in a way that is less, hopefully less intimidating and scary, but more inspiring and motivating. And I think it's just a really cool initiative to see people really accept this book and make it popular. So yeah, and moving on to another species, there is this one individual of a tortoise that I wanted to talk about. And when I'm talking about certain individuals, it's important to note that like these behaviors are exhibited within the entire species. So when I'm talking about a certain individual, this is not an exception, this is not a rarity, this is not abnormal. These are individuals within a species that have queer behaviors as part of their social dynamics and identity dynamics. So again, I'm going to be talking about a giant tortoise, and this one is called Jonathan. He was a fan favorite around the world and has multiple claims to fame, and because he is the oldest tortoise in the world with 191 years of life under his shell. And he is estimated to have hatched in 1832, making him about 50 years older than the University of Texas, which is relevant because I'm reading this off of an article written by people at the University of Texas. And his impressive lifespan is what first brought him to fame, but then secondly, he has a long-term companionship with another male tortoise that also made him noteworthy. And this other tortoise, Frederica, was brought in as a female mate to Jonathan, and the pair hit it off and became inseparable. But later on, they realized that Frederica was not a female tortoise. He is a male. So they renamed him to be Frederick after 2017, and he and Jonathan have been continuing living their little gay tortoise lives together. And I just think it's so cute because, like, you think of elderly gay couples within the natural world, and I think they're probably undeniably the most famous in the natural world in terms of wildlife, and I think they're so adorable. And if you have the time to look them up, it's Jonathan and Frederick the tortoises, and they're really, really cute. So I wanted to mention them. And I think it's also important to recognize that within the wildlife world, queerness is not just exemplified in sexuality, we also can be talking about different gender identities. And not all wildlife species have or adhere to a binary perspective of gender. And an important example of this is the cardinal, actually. So a half male, half female cardinal was spotted in 2019 sporting both bright red and muted brown feathers. So the coloring of these feathers was split almost exactly down the middle of the bird, with the signature red male plumage and the signature female brown plumage split half and half. And so based on human categorizations of sex and gender, this is definitely an intersex cardinal and can also be considered by gender. So what's important about this is that intersex is not only seen within human populations, but also in cardinals, for example, or other, I'm sure there are many other examples within the natural world. Cardinals was the example that I picked for my research within this episode, but I think it's just, it's really disheartening to see when people delegitimize or brush off the existence of intersex people, and I think it's just like ridiculous when you think about it in the science-based, proven facts within wildlife science and queer ecology. This intersex identity is shown within multiple different species, and it's quite ridiculous, I think, to or ignorant to try and argue that intersex is invalid or unnatural, because it's just ridiculous. Another example of intersex identity within the animal kingdom is lionesses. So if you want to identify the sex of a lion, you usually think about whether it has a mane or not. And if it does, it's male, and if it doesn't, it's female, right? So that's not actually the case. If you've been using that strategy while looking at some lions, you might be a little confused, because you may on the surface identify them as male when in reality you would have been wrong. So there are a pride of 5 female lions that all grew manes out of the blue, and in addition to these new manes, they began exhibiting behaviors typically characteristic of male lions. So they were frequently seen roaring, scent marking, and kind of ripping the gender binary to shreds. And I think this is important again because lions are such a huge symbol, and I think also a huge symbol of masculine identity within the hypermasculine social media world. At least lions are known as this overly dominant and strong and powerful species, and they definitely are strong and powerful and very fascinating animals. But it's important to note that they have been seen exhibiting non-heteronormative sexual behaviors and also intersex identities. So you can't really continue, at least scientifically or knowledgeably, identifying lions as this symbol of male pride or hyper masculine identity when or to use that hyper masculine identity to delegitimize queerness or contribute to homophobic narratives, when in reality these species are known to be quite queer and quite naturally and unjudgmentally queer. I think that's a perfect example of kind of tearing down those misconceptions within what is wild, what is natural, what is ultimately normal. It's completely unfounded in scientific research. So I just think that's a really fun thing to think about when you see people out on the internet trying to use these symbols and to kind of fit into their binary narrative. It doesn't really fit. They would like to think it does, but it doesn't. And then lastly, I wanted to talk about gender fluidity within the natural world. And one of these examples, or I actually have two examples, is seahorses. So seahorses actually have a quite unique or interesting way of identifying genders. And this is not like, I said unique, but unique in the way that it's like kind of interesting and you know, we don't talk about it a lot, but there are other examples of this happening within nature as well. For male seahorses, fatherhood is marked by pregnancy and birth. So the males carry up to 2,000 developing seahorse babies, and when the gestation period is over, muscle contractions incite the birth, forcing the seahorse to expel the babies from the pouch. So again, this is kind of recognizing the sex fluidity and gender fluidity of seahorses. And, you know, I've known this fact for quite a long time. As a person who grew up very interested in wildlife and nature, I knew this fact very early on, but I think it was presented in a way that kind of presented it as weird, unnatural, like the exception, you know? Like, oh, this is the one male that gives birth, and it's kind of weird and alien and scary and spooky. But in reality, there are other examples of this happening within nature, and I think it's, as I've grown older, I've recognized that that's kind of, we often, with TV shows, media, put a voice to animals that is like humanistic, right? We put our human values and societies into animal life societies, and part of that is kind of like, you know, just quite like natural for us to do, you know, like if we want to relate to something, we might put characteristics that we can relate to onto the animal. But in reality, these things within nature, I think it's important to talk about within a space of this happens within nature and it's natural, and we see something similar in humans, you know, kind of dragging like pointing out similarities within nature and like within wildlife characteristics and human characteristics, because we are part of that wild nature, or we are part of nature itself, and we are part of the natural world is what I was trying to say. And what I mean by all of this is that yes, it was presented to me in a way that it was like weird, scary, and unnatural, but I think within the space of queer ecology, we're kind of talking about, oh, it's not that uncommon, it's not that unnatural, it's definitely not the exception. We see this in other, like, similar contexts within other species, including our own. And I think it's important to talk about it like that instead of some like weird, scary, spooky thing. And another example that I think is really interesting is the clownfish. So clownfish social groups and families are led by a dominant female with a male sidekick and a bunch of juveniles. And if the female clownfish dies, the male sidekick, in quotes, changes sex and assumes the dominant female position within the group. And so also, one of the juveniles will assume the role of the male sidekick and become the mating pair officially. So again, there is so much fluidity within sex and gender and sexuality within nature that I think is not either talked about enough or recognized enough, because I think still within our society that is so much more accepting than it was 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 70 years ago, we still don't necessarily talk about this stuff, I think, as much as we should be, or as much as we should be normalizing it. And yeah, I think it's just again important to realize that nature doesn't adhere to our rigid categorization of people, and I think it's time that we shouldn't really continue to do that either. And I just, from a naturalist point of view, I think it's really valuable that we are able to see this recognized in nature, and see queer ecology come up as a emerging field that is gaining more respect, recognition, and resources as time goes on. I think it's just one of the most heartwarming examples of a field really starting to be accepted within science. And again, what a perfect way to kind of start this podcast and talk about an emerging field like this. It's really close to my heart that this is like becoming more recognized and talked about. And the next section that I was going to talk about within this episode is the basis of genetics within queerness. And there are several theories about why same-sex behaviors or queerness in general has been continually represented within the gene pool throughout evolution, not just in like humans, but also in animals, plants, and fungi as well. And I think a lot of the narrative of the homophobic rhetoric is if it's not based in anything else, it might be trying to be based in evolutionary sense, like, oh well, you know, fitness, like this idea of fitness that people may use to delegitimize queerness and different gender identities, is like fitness is the ability to survive and reproduce. Like if you can't reproduce, then you know you're less fit, and like that is unnatural, like you should have been weeded out. Basically, they're not saying this necessarily, like, but it is dehumanizing and very, very dangerous perspective on queerness and those and different sexualities seen within our human existence, and also in while they might not recognize this in nature as well. So it's important to kind of talk about why this point of view is unfounded and invalid within a scientific context, because you cannot use fitness to delegitimize queerness. Because if that were the case, why is queerness still around? Why is it so prevalent? I mean, within over 1,500 species and counting. You know, why is it still not weeded out of the gene pool at this point? We've had thousands and thousands of years of evolutionary growth and change, and why is it still here then? That is because fitness is not necessarily so rigid and defined like how many people perceive it as. Because yes, the definition of fitness is the ability to survive and reproduce, but that definition doesn't necessarily apply to such an individualistic point of view. And what I mean by this is, if that were the case, if it's more fit to for every single individual to reproduce, why are honeybee colonies structured the way they are? Why is only one queen reproducing out of the entire colony that has hundreds and hundreds of bees? Like, why is it only one female that is doing the reproducing? Well, that's because there are major benefits to working in a society like that, and to having only one reproducing female, like reproducing member of the colony. And the reason that society hasn't crumbled, their species has continued to flourish and survive and work efficiently is because there are strategies to improve community fitness and species fitness that are not so individualistic in nature. And again, I'm going to kind of talk about several theories about some indirect benefits to having individuals within a population that do not directly reproduce. And one of those theories is kin selection and the helper in the nest hypothesis. So this theory suggests that individuals with a homosexual orientation may contribute to reproductive success of their relatives. So this may be by providing resources, care, protection, or any other benefit, and this ensures the survival of their shared genes. So again, this is kind of combating that theory that one male, one female reproduces and combines a baby is the most fit or the most evolutionarily natural or beneficial. That's not necessarily the case, because there are benefits to having people surrounding a reproductive couple that provide resources, that are more able to help raise a child or be there in terms of emotional or social support, which I believe is another theory coming up. But for now, the second theory that I've heard a lot about and researched about is overdominance or heterozygote advantage. Heterozygote. This theory proposes that genes associated with same-sex attraction might confer a reproductive advantage when present in a heterozygous state in individuals that exhibit heterosexual attraction. So what this is basically saying is that there is a genetic basis for sexuality. We've proven this. There are multiple genes that contribute to sexuality, and this theory proposes that genes that have maybe one heterosexual trait versus one homosexual trait confer with some sort of advantage. And there are many different examples of what that advantage could be, or of why this might be beneficial. And I am certainly not a genetics expert, but I can tell you that this theory is exemplified within a lot of different animal species as well, and so I think it definitely holds merit within our species as well. And another theory that I wanted to talk about is called sexual antagonism. This theory suggests that genes promoting same-sex behavior in one sex might be beneficial in the other sex. So this theory is kind of talking about an example where a gene associated with same-sex attraction in males might increase fertility in females, because again, genetics is not based in some let's change up this to make this more beneficial for the species. It is incurred through natural random mutations within the genetic pool. So it's when we talk about why within genetics, it's often not a straightforward answer, because there's no power changing these genes necessarily for the better of anyone. It's rooted out through natural selection, and if this sexual antagonism theory is true, then it might not have been weeded out of the gene pool necessarily because it confers an advantage if it was presented in a different sex. So again, something to think about, that genetics is complicated. There are nuances within this conversation of how homosexuality or different sexualities and gender, different identities also are exemplified within behaviors and also through a genetic lens as well. So those three theories are the main ones that I've seen while doing my research on this. But if you guys want to talk or do more research about more theories that are based in genetics, there's also alliance formation, population regulation, epigenetics, and neurophysiological differences that are often used as kind of theories to hypothesize why queerness has been continually represented within the gene pool and may at times be more favorable than having a heteronormative identity and behavior. So again, I encourage everyone that's listening to this that is interested to do your own research and kind of look at more of that scientific basis, because I think it's really interesting, and I hope you guys do too. But again, this episode is going a little long, and I did want to talk about, in conclusion, why this information and this practice, this study of queer ecology is so important. And I think in general, like, why does it matter? The answer is that science is a beautiful reminder that queerness is natural and is not a human invention, is not a mistake, it's not unnatural, it's not abnormal in any way, but it is instead a part of Earth. It is a part of the wild and messy and diverse fabric of nature. And again, it is important to recognize our existence within nature. We are a part of the animal kingdom. We are animals ourselves, and we can't separate ourselves in that way, or in turn use nature as a way to invalidate people within our society when that is completely unfounded in scientific truth and fact. So again, final thoughts on queer ecology. I have pretty much always been fascinated. As soon as I, was able to learn more about queer ecology, I thought it was a very, very interesting field to think about. And I'm so glad that over the years, I've been able to see more news and more coverage on this. I mean, literally, I think a new nature documentary was recently released either this year or last year that was talking about queer identities within nature and the basis of queerness within nature, and just seeing that represented in a mainstream context was really fascinating to me and really rewarding to see as someone who's been updating constantly about what the new updates are within this field. So again, encourage all of you to look into queer ecology, follow up on some news, and support queer ecologists that are out there and recognizing these behaviors, documenting these behaviors, and publishing these new interesting discoveries within our natural world. And as always, this is kind of the end of our first episode here, and I would love and appreciate if everyone that is listening to or got to this point in the episode, thank you. And please like, comment, and subscribe if you're on YouTube. Please follow if you're on Spotify or any other platform that you listen to podcasts. And I will be back next week with another episode. If you guys want to see anything else, please comment. Or if you have anything to say about everything that I've been talking about this episode, please comment. I really, really love talking to people about these paradigms and new and complex ideas within conservation. It's my favorite thing to do. So please like, comment, and subscribe. Follow for more, and I'll see you next week on another episode of Wildlight. So thank you guys. Bye-bye.